Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on Boxing. Today, we're talking about the welterweight division. The other day, I was sitting around thinking about what am I going to talk about. And because of the whole Manny Pacquiao scenario, it brought up similar issues that obviously we've had in other divisions, such as 168 with Canelo Alvarez, where a lot of the top up and coming young fighters have been too focused on waiting for an opportunity to get the big money fight with Canelo. And because of that, they haven't been fighting each other, which obviously it has kind of stagnated the 168-pound division and hasn't let a lot of the unknown up and coming fighters that maybe aren't well known to the casual boxing fan build their names and build their brands to make them actually fighters that people would be intrigued to watch. And there's quite a few good young fighters at 168 pounds. But of course, a lot of casuals are more focused just on David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez, and literally that's all. And because of that, they look past all the other budding potential fighters in the division. Currently, that's a similar situation, obviously, at 147 pounds. Uh, Obviously, many of us were hoping that Boots Ennis was going to be in a position to potentially fight the other champions to unify and become undisputed and become the king of the 147-pound division, thus making all the up-and-comers need to fight one another to put themselves into mandatory positions to get an opportunity to face him in fights that at that point obviously would be more embraced by boxing fans because guys would have had to build themselves into a position to force Boots Ennis and the sanctioning bodies to make those fights. But unfortunately, PBC fighter Mario Barros was never going to go that route, which is not a surprise to anybody that's watched how the PBC has always operated in this boxing world. And of course, excuse me, excuse me, holy crap. Brian Norman, the WBO champion, who blatantly ducked an opportunity to unify with Boots Ennis, all to go to Japan to face an unknown Japanese mandatory opponent, just because obviously the payday was well worth it, especially knowing that they were going in with a below par opponent. Now, of course, we're getting the insurgence of these 140, 135-pound fighters moving to the division, which for me, I think is a good thing. The more name recognition, the more top fighters we have in the 147-pound division, the more potential we have for very good fights to unfold. So with Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, Rolly Romero, and fighters of this type moving to the division, I think it renews the division. I don't necessarily say that these fighters are great welterweights because we have to wait and see. Obviously, the Devin Haney Brian Norman fight is probably the best fight currently on the table at 147 pounds. So you got to give both Haney and Norman, a golf clap for making that fight, and of course for Turki Al-Sheikh for pushing it. Unfortunately for Boots, he decided that making this weight after unifying against Stanionis was too much, so he's moved to 154 pounds, leaving an obvious gap, a hole in the 147-pound division. But for me, I don't see that as too much of an issue. I felt that he was above the competition and that it would have been an easy pyramid type of scenario with him being on top. So with him gone, this kind of evens the playing field. And then you get all these other potential contenders and fighters in the division, which may not be all big names, but obviously are on a similar level. Right now, currently, the biggest name at 147 pounds would be Ryan Garcia, who, from what people are saying, he's going to rematch with Rolly Romero and probably win the WBA title, I would think, is probably the plan. If he's able to win the rematch with Rolly Romero, he could finally become a legitimate world champion. For Rolly Romero, this would obviously elevate him to a two-weight world champion. Obviously, people are not big fans of Rolly, but Rolly at least has name recognition. He's been in with solid opponents, and he's even gotten a quality win, beating Ryan Garcia, something that Devin Haney wasn't able to do. Uh, Ironically enough, I saw this video from Dante's Boxing Nation, and this is one of the problems with these boxing channels, right? Is this negativity that they continue to push, most of it primarily based on race. But he comes out and says, bad news for the welterweight division. Bad news. Bad news for the welterweight division was when Bud Crawford destroyed Errol Spence and both of them moved out of the 147-pound division. At that point, it was bad news for the 147-pound division because you no longer had a star. Of course, we tried to put Boots into that position, but unfortunately, he was outgrowing the division already at that time, just like Virgil Ortiz, another top up-and-coming 147-pound fighter, which definitely left a hole in this division. Let's look at these current rankings just to put some perspective on everything. So these are boxing scene. These are the rankings for the official boxing sanctioning bodies. So let's just scroll through until we find welterweight. Ta-da! There we go. So here's the current situation. Currently, the IBF has a vacant title, obviously with Boots Ennis moving to 154. And we know Paddy Donovan and Lewis Crocker, two top 5 ranked fighters from this division, are going to be rematching to win that vacant title. Neither of these are big names in America, but as far as the UK market, this is potentially a legitimate world champion, right? And being affiliated in the UK, obviously potential ties with Turki Al Sheikh. This is obviously a very marketable world champion in this division right now. You would say out of the current world champions, this champion would probably be the biggest and most marketable out of all of them. Some people may disagree, but that's just unfortunately the way the cookie crumbles. The UK market is obviously doing very well, especially for fighters that maybe aren't popular with casual fans, specifically in America. For me, I mean, I thought Crocker Donovan, it was a great first fight. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds in the second fight. I don't really think either one of these champions is elite, but when you look at this division across the board with Mario Barros and Rolly Romero and even Brian Norman, there's no current elite world champion in this division. So it's pretty even. You would say there's parity. Obviously, the one guy you would think is probably the best would be the younger Brian Norman Jr. But at this point, you know, there's a reason why Devin Haney is chasing him, because he is young. He's primarily fought a certain level of fighter. He's never been in with an elite boxer. And that's obviously why Devin Haney feels very comfortable and confident that he could win that fight. And I even see a way where he could legitimately win and beat Brian Norman to become a 3-way world champion. And that would be a great win. He's going after arguably the toughest opponent in the welterweight division. So again, a golf clap for Devin Haney. He's not chasing the weak link like earlier on in his career he was speculating about moving up to face Mario Barros. That would have been some weak sauce shit, chasing legitimately the weakest champion in the division. So chasing Brian Norman, who arguably is the best, that's fantastic. And that's why him and Brian Norman are going to get paid big money, because it's a legitimate challenge, a legitimate opponent. Rolly Romero, who now I guess has been elevated, is the WBA champion. Obviously, him and Ryan Garcia, who's number 4, are going to rematch. And we understand for Rolly Romero, that is easily the biggest money fight available to him. He obviously must feel very confident because he's already beat Ryan Garcia, and he beat him pretty fucking easily. And unlike Devin Haney, he was able to take away that left hand from Ryan Garcia. So we'll see if that was just a less than 100% Ryan Garcia, or if that was truly who Ryan Garcia is in the rematch. And it makes sense. I mean, I think that fight is worth redoing, even though the first fight obviously wasn't very entertaining. But it definitely puts a potential Devin Haney-Ryan Garcia rematch back on the table. If Ryan Garcia can beat Rolly Romero this time, He becomes a WBA world champion. He's finally become a legitimate world champion. And if Devin Haney beats Brian Norman Jr. to become a three-way world champion, he's obviously going to be a pound-for-pound top fighter in boxing. And the matchup between him and Ryan Garcia is going to be one of the biggest fights in boxing. So all of a sudden, the welterweight division goes from being a division that has no real intrigue, no real big money fight, no real face of the division, to one of the biggest fights in boxing. And the winner of that obviously is a pound for pound top fighter in the sport. So the welterweight division will bounce back into, significance from insignificance very easily. But obviously that depends on Ryan Garcia winning and Devin Haney winning. And in boxing, ultimately, that's what you need to fucking do. If you want the money, you want the luster, you want the attention, you need to fucking win fights. My biggest fear when I was first talking about this division and the video I was going to make was regarding Manny Pacquiao and how potentially having Pacquiao in this division is kind of similar to Canelo Alvarez at 168. Pacquiao doesn't have a world title. That was lucky that he didn't end up getting the title off of Mario Barros. To be fair, I would have loved to see Manny Pacquiao become a world champion again. I would have loved it just on a personal fan base level. But for the betterment of boxing, it's way better that Mario Barros won. Because if Pacquiao was a champion, then all these other champions would be ducking and dodging one another, specifically to chase after Manny Pacquiao. So you'd have, obviously, Brian Norman try to get Pacquiao, Devin Haney try to get Pacquiao, meaning that they wouldn't be fighting one another. You'd have, obviously, Rolly Romero, who had already talked about potentially fighting Manny Pacquiao, try to get that fight. Ryan Garcia, who's talked about how that was one of his goals historically to get a fight with Pacquiao, also chasing after Pacquiao. And there was even talk back in the day about that fight happening. So, you got to ask yourself, was it really a lie from Ryan Garcia's perspective or a real legitimate conversation? And I would probably say it was a really legitimate conversation. Then you throw Conor Benn into this conversation, depending on what happens with him and Chris Eubank rematch. If that fight falls through, then Conor Benn becomes a real legitimate opponent here. But for me, I think obviously for Conor Benn, the legitimate opponent he should probably be chasing is the Paddy Donovan Lewis Crocker fight. You could do that in the UK, do it in the O2 Arena. You put a huge fucking crowd in, and that is for Benn to become a legitimate world champion in the division. So potentially you could have Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia, and Conor Benn as champions at 147 pounds. And then obviously Mario Barros, depending on what happens with him moving forward. Hopefully the WBC mandates him to face Solomon Sissoko, because I'm guaranteed that he's going to lose that fight. Obviously, Solomon Sissoko is not a big name, but forget about name recognition. Let's talk about skill and talent, right? For me, being a hardcore fan, I'd prefer to have him there, even though I do know Mario Barros probably is more marketable, especially with those other champions in position. You could make a Devin Haney, Mario Barros unification fight, and that would obviously be more marketable in the US, or a Ryan Garcia, Mario Barros fight, which would obviously be far more marketable in the US. Conor Benn versus a Mario Barros, which would obviously be far more marketable in the UK than a Solomon Sissoko. But for my own interest, I always like to see these young up-and-coming fighters. And ironically enough, there was this video today, as I mentioned, from Dante's Boxing Nation. Let's just listen to it right now.
Is going to fight against Paddy Donovan. Two fighters I've never heard of, to be honest with you guys. But this is a rematch, and they.
So listen to this. This is one of the biggest YouTube channels on the planet, Dante's Boxing Nation. 7,000 people already watched this video from 10 hours ago, and he doesn't know who Paddy Donovan or Lewis Crocker is, because he's primarily American-centric. He always has been, he always will be. Even though he lives in Asia, he doesn't care about Asian boxing. He doesn't care about UK boxing, right? But yet this is the channel people go to for boxing knowledge. But let's go on to listen to his rant, because obviously I just broke shit down on how this division is right in position to bounce right back. depending on fighters winning. Like, obviously, it comes down to guys winning fights they need to win, but that's always been the situation. If you're going to get upset by unknown fighters, then yeah, I mean, it's going to show more parity in the division, but at the same time, it's going to make for fights that casual fans don't care about because they don't know who those fighters are. Let me just give you a list of fighters currently in this division who I'm really excited about, but yet casual fans don't know who they are and don't give a crap. You got, obviously, Rolly Romero's mandatory, Shakram Giziev, who's always been an elite Olympian, who's been in position from time to time to get a world title, but people have ducked him. He's never been really pushed into those fights. He's a very talented fighter, not the most exciting fighter, but obviously a guy with a lot of amateur pedigree, a very good boxer, a skilled fighter, and I want to see him get a world title fight. You also have Pat McCormick, another UK Olympian, who's a very exciting fighter. He hasn't been really moved that well by the UK promoters. He's been a little inactive, but he's right now, ranked by the WBA currently at number 8. He's a guy I would love to see in these positions, potentially against the winner of Crocker and Donovan. Right, that's a great fight, and a fight I think he could win, even with his less than 10 professional fights. You have Julian Rodriguez, a very exciting fighter as well. You have obviously Stanionis, who was always seen as one of the best fighters in the division, as well as Aegis Kavalaskis, right? You have Mexican fighter Raul Curiel, right? Not the most skilled fighter, but a guy that's going to entertain, a guy that comes forward, throws a lot of punches, and is just a guy that's going to make great fights. Then you have Rohan Polanco. Rohan Polanco for the Dominican Republic really looks like a fucking serious threat in this division. But yet nobody's really talking about Rohan Polanco. You have, of course, Solomon Sissoko, who's Mario Barrios' mandatory, a skilled fighter, a French national, an Olympian, a guy that obviously has been under the radar because he's not American. He doesn't fight out of America. So for a lot of American fans and American channels like Dante's Boxing Nation, they don't really know who this guy is. Then you have, what is it? Where it's right there. What? Let me just. Not Boxing Scene. How come they changed the name from Boxing Scene? What? Boxing Scene is in conjunction with that promotional company, but somehow it's escaping my brain right now. But obviously, you have Nicholas Flav, who fights out of that promotional company. I don't know why. For some reason, I can't think of what it's called. But obviously, they're affiliated with Boxing Scene, and they do like their fights on YouTube. So it's very low level, but obviously they got a lot of good fighters in their stable. And a lot of their fighters have been getting big opportunities in world title fights over the last year. Example, Lamont Roach is an example, getting a fight with Tank Davis. But Nicholas Flaz, also a very exciting fighter. I think he's also Puerto Rican or Dominican Republic fighter. So you have a lot of good up-and-coming fighters in and around this division, and from all over, right? Then, of course, Jack Catterall just moved to this division as well. Not the most exciting a fighter, but a guy with a lot of experience, a guy that's hard for anyone to beat, right? Alexis Rocha, who, of course, was a world champion under the WBO for a short period of time until he ended up losing to Santillan. Might not be the most elite fighter in boxing, but he's a guy that's going to entertain it. He's a guy like Stanionis, Kavalaskis, Raul Curiel, right? These guys might be limited and one-dimensional, but they're guaranteed to fucking entertain fans. So as far as up-and-coming fighters in this division, there's plenty of them. Maybe none of these guys are that next superstar fighter in the division, but somewhere around, there's always that fighter who potentially is going to materialize and make himself known. And that's what's fun about watching boxing, getting to see which of these guys actually can do that. Whether it is a Rohan Polanco, who looks like he could be a legitimate fucking beast, might not be the most marketable American fighter, but potentially could still be a crowd favorite and a fighter that dominates the division, potentially.
Are both undefeated And in the first fight, Caddy Donovan was disqualified. This is definitely looking like one of the weakest divisions in boxing, at least when it comes to the champions and the top 10. But what makes the situation even worse when it comes to the welterweight division is I have a feeling that none of these champions are going to be willing to unify the belts. I mean, Mario Barrios, he never showed any interest.
Now, of course, here's Dante being negative. I mean, the reality is Mario Barros would fucking jump at an opportunity to face Ryan Garcia for unification. He would literally fucking jump at the opportunity. And that fight potentially is there. He might not be as eager to jump into a Devin Haney fight because Devin Haney isn't necessarily as marketable, and you might not necessarily get guaranteed as much money to fight him. And stylistically, he may be a little more difficult. But Devin Haney's also a pound for pound fighter that's got Turkey Al Sheikh behind him. So that's potentially another way you could get Mario Barros to jump after a big money fight. Also, if Conor Benn does fight the UK fighter for the IBF title, now you got Conor Benn, who in the UK is a big money man. So there you got three big names, big money guys as potentially three other champions in the division. Mario Barros would jump at the opportunity to face any of those three because at this point of his career, he could easily get beat by guys like Kavalaskis, Raul Curiel, Solomon Sissoko, Jack Catterall, all guys that are ranked in his rankings and potentially could be mandated for him as the WBC champion to face. And all four of those guys I see beating him. And you would make no money fighting any of them. So, of course, it makes more sense to chase after a big money fight against a Conor Benn, a Devin Haney, or a Ryan Garcia. Obviously, those fighters need to win those titles. But currently, they're in position right now to do that. Devin Haney is literally fucking signed to fight Brian Norman Jr. for his WBO title. And from what we've heard, the Ryan Garcia Rolly Romero fight is fucking signed, sealed, and delivered, meaning that Ryan Garcia is in position to become the WBA world champion if he can beat Rolly Romero in the rematch. So right there, the whole division fucking changes on a fucking on a pin. Boom! All of a sudden, it's one of the hottest, most excited, most talked about divisions in boxing. Just for two fighters winning.
Of fighting against Duran Ennis, and you have Rolly Romero, who had never showed any interest of fighting Devin Haney, going all the way back to 135. So now, when it comes to the winner of Devin Haney and Brian Norman, these other champions are going to be even more reluctant to fight the winner. I have a feeling what's going to happen.
But that's what you get from a guy like him. What he's trying to do is elevate Devin Haney and Brian Norman because they are black fighters, and he wants to obviously always have black fighters be the face of boxing in America. He always fanboys for black Americans. The irony with this narrative is that when Floyd Mayweather was a champion at 147 pounds, he was a champion in that division for how fucking long? 8-9 years before he actually unified titles with anybody, Manny Pacquiao. He was a champion for a long time and was just consistently fighting opponents in his sanctioning body, never trying to fight any of the other world champions. Didn't try to fight Keith Thurman when he was a world champion, tried to put Errol Spence in the way of that fight, saying that Keith Thurman needed to beat Errol Spence to get an opportunity to face him, right? And the only reason he ended up fighting Pacquiao is because after 8 years of fans pushing for it, the money was at a point where he needed to take that fight. He could not walk away from it because he would never have been guaranteed that kind of money fighting anybody else in boxing. But yet this guy had no issue with Floyd Mayweather never trying to unify. But now, all of a sudden, he's so caught up in it and so fucking upset and can't understand these guys not wanting to unify. Again, the typical kind of fucking fear-mongering that we get from the media. American fucking media hating on Trump and fucking everyone else. I mean, YouTube boxing community always making this a fucking black and white issue, right? Like this is the typical fear-mongering media consistently does across the board.
is the other champions, they're going to freeze out the winner of Haney versus Brian Norman, and they're going to fight against each other because those are much safer fights. And this is
You mean kind of like the PBC and Errol Spence freezed out Bud Crawford for 5 fucking years, not having Bud Crawford get an opportunity to face any of the other world champions because they were all PBC and they wanted to focus more on making PBC unification fights that they could put on pay per view. And regardless of who won, the PBC was still going to be the winner. Whereas if they fought Bud Crawford, especially when he was with ESPN Top Rank, potentially they would lose all their leverage if they didn't win. But you're going to ignore that now. Isn't it ironic that now somehow these sanctioning body politics no longer and promotional politics aren't an issue anymore? Like Mario Barros is a PBC fighter. So if he's going to duck Devin Haney and Brian Norman Jr. because they're on the wrong side of the fucking street, what's the issue? Isn't that the exact same thing you fucking were okay with for years? For years.
the reason why I keep telling you guys that mandatory unifications need to be implemented in the sport of boxing. Because in the four belt.
Now think about this. Now he's saying that this is why mandatory fights need to be implemented in the 4 belt era. But what does mandatory belts or mandatory opponents, which are implemented in boxing, it happens all the time. The IBF always fucks shit up, stripping a fighter, even though there's a bigger and better fight that boxing fans actually want to jam some fucking unknown fucking European fighter into a world title fight that no one fucking cares about. Nobody wants to see. Nobody understands how this guy who's never literally beaten anyone all of a sudden is a fucking mandatory. But there you go. But how does this have champions fight each other? Because what happens is, okay, I'm Mario Barros, and I'm mandated to fight Solomon Sissoko. So me being Al Heyman, what I do is I sign a contract with Sissoko so that he can get the fight with Mario Barros. I probably maybe even put a rematch clause into it. So even if my fighter loses, he's guaranteed another opportunity to fight for that title, meaning there's no unification fight going to happen right now. And then what I do is I put that Sissoko guy on maybe a 2 or 3 fight contract, because by allowing him this opportunity, he's got to sign a 2 or 3 fight contract with me, right, so that he can get that opportunity. So now, even though he wins, he's still part of my stable as a PBC fighter. So what I do is I still duck a Brian Norman or Devin Haney because they're not on my promotional fucking side. Like, and Dante knows this, but he's going to fucking talk bullshit and fucking lie to you because with him, there's always some sort of racial conspiracy on the fucking table, right?
Era. A champion, he should not be able to hold the belt hostage. Just like a champion is ordered to fight as mandatory at least once a year or whatever it is, they should also be forced to unify the belts at least once a year or once every 2 years. And just like it works for a mandatory.
Oh, so now what he wants a forced mandatory situation. Well, you could talk about this, but ironically enough, I mean, I'm sure that on other occasions he wouldn't be pushing for this. I never heard him talking about how Floyd Mayweather needed to fight mandatories, or sorry, not mandatories, because as a WBA champion, Floyd didn't have any mandatories. He was the super champion, not the regular champion. As a super champion, he did not have mandatories. So he could pick and choose the opponents he wanted to fight, all flat-footed Latino fighters that he fought on Mexican holidays twice a year. Okay, so Floyd didn't have to deal with that. But he also never pushed Floyd to fight unification fights. Just like I don't think I ever hear him talking about how Tank Davis needs to fight unification fights. Tank Davis has never fought a unification fight. Not at 130, not at 135. So while I agree with the premise that fighters should be mandated, forced to unify, see, this is why I liked when other promotional sanctioning bodies actually put champions into their mandatory position. forcing unification, right? We saw this on a few occasions in boxing. And for me, that makes the most sense. Because now let's just jump to BoxRec rankings right now, just to give you a different perspective and show you why this is obviously something that needs to happen. But that's why I think there should only be one world champion. But some people go, oh, no, that's no good. Then contenders wouldn't get their opportunity for world title. No, what contenders would have to do is actually fight top fucking contenders to move up into the number one fucking position. What's the issue? And then you have the champion face two fucking mandatories for the year. If he wants to fight three times, he can pick and choose his third fight, but two of those fights should be against the mandatory opponent, meaning that the champion is being forced to fight the best opponents in the division. And those guys, to move up through the rankings like it was historically, had to fucking beat top guys to jump up. You couldn't jump up to number one unless you beat number 7, number 5, number 3, right? 3 top 10 fighters you'd need to beat at least to move into that number one position, as well as potentially some other guys maybe losing. And then you'd be put into that position. Kind of like we see with the UFC. But, you got some fight fans that are more comfortable protecting their fighters. And that's what they want. They want their fighters to be protected when it suits them. That's why you don't hear these PBC guys really push this kind of mentality for the most part. So here we go. Here's the current rankings right now. Obviously, we'll go past it. How does Devin Haney become number one? Ask yourself that. He's never had a legitimate fight at 147 pounds. But here's the rankings right now. So Devin Haney, number one, according to this, because obviously Boots Ennis has just moved up. Brian Norman, number 3. Liam Paro, who just got beat, never won a legitimate fight, is somehow now in the division. But once again, another 140-pound fighter moving to the division. Polanco, number 5. That's good news. Crocker, Ketrell, Mbenga, Sissoko, Kuriel, Shinsazaki probably should fall off those rankings outside of the top 20 right now. Giovanni Santillan, another fighter that obviously is an exciting fighter. David Papet, Karen, Gisioff, Roca, Romero, Ryan Garcia at number 18, right? This just shows you, according to these rankings, Ryan Garcia and Rolly Romero, aren't even ranked in the top 10 of BoxRec rankings, yet they're going to be fighting for the WBA title, because this is the kind of shit you get with sanctioning bodies. Then, of course, you got Ramirez, another very good fighter who unfortunately hasn't been very active, hasn't been promoted very well, but at one time was talked about as the welterweight version of Lomachenko. Yelenusiov, who's come back at 34, Barrios, Canadian fighter Christopher Guerrero, I've never heard of him. Brandon Lee, who also moved to this division, Brian Flores, and Stanionis at number 25. I don't know how Stanionis losing to Boots Ennis falls all the way to number 25, but, this is boxing. But here you go. You want to move up these rankings, you face other champions, and by beating guys, you move into position and you earn your world title fights. See, for me, there's a lot of young up-and-coming fighters. I want to see these guys face each other and move up, become mandatories, get their opportunities. And people are going to be more excited about them getting their opportunities if they've seen them 2 or 3 times against legitimate competition, right? The problem with many of these rankings from the IBF is consistently they have fighters, nobody knows who the fuck they are. Example, if you go to, right now, Andy Cruz is the number 1 mandatory fighter at 135. The 2 spots at 140 are vacant, and then Liam Paro is there. Obviously, we know Dalton Smith and Delgado are going to be there from what we heard. Smith is going to be fighting Subriel Matisse. So obviously, potentially, Delgado is going to be in position right there. Then, of course, you go to 147. We just saw Donovan Crocker going to rematch At 154, Erickson Lubin is number one, even though well, I guess he's been inactive, but at least his last opponent was a good win. Then you move up to 160 pounds and you get Itanosa Oliho. I guarantee nobody watching this show has ever watched Etanosa Alijo fight before, doesn't know who that fucking guy is, yet he's in position to become Janabek's mandatory. If Janabek fights him, people are going to shit on Janabek, talk about him cherry picking and fighting bums. But this is the IBF mandating a guy like him. Uh, Shishkin and Iglesias are apparently going to fight at 168. The winner of that becomes Canelo's IBF mandatory. That's a great fight. That's what I want. You should have guys like Shishkin, Iglesias fight each other. Then the winner, number 2 versus 3, becomes number 1 and really earns an opportunity. I think Iglesias is going to win, and then he's a fucking dangerous opponent for Canelo. You got, of course, Michael Eifert for Dmitry Bivol's IBF title. And there's even talk and speculation that they're going to strip him to put Michael Eifert in that position. This is just as fucking stupid as when the IBF put William Skull into the number 1 position for Canelo Alvarez. For heavyweight, you get Guy Chinkara, who is the number 1 for Jay Opataya. Again, if Jay Opataya fights this guy, people are going to criticize him, hate on him. They don't even know who that guy is. For the IBF at heavyweight, Derek Chisora, 40-something-year-old Derek Chisora is the number 1 fucking IBF mandatory for Alexander Usyk title. We've already seen Alexander Usyk beat him. But once again, this is the problem with these sanctioning bodies. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about the current situation with the welterweight division? Obviously, I'm an optimist and I see positive things moving into the future and big names and big potential matches. I just thought it was interesting watching Dante's gloomier than thou kind of perspective of how everyone's going to dub the black American fighter, because really that's the whole premise of what he's saying. None of these guys are going to want to fight Devin Haney or fucking Brian Norman. But to be fair, they're fighting each other. And I'm sure Turki Al-Sheikh is going to be pushing the winner into a big fight moving forward. So I don't think there's any fear of these guys not being in bigger and better fights moving forward. But you let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Peace out. I'm just glad Pacquiao doesn't have a title, because that would really slow down this division.